Would you dare sit in an old rocking chair, one that moves on its own every time it rains? One man did, and he was never the same again. The house stood at the edge of town, shrouded in mist and mystery. It was one of those places that locals spoke about in hushed whispers, their voices tinged with a mixture of fear and fascination. The old Victorian-style structure had been abandoned for years, yet one thing about it remained strangely alive: the rocking chair by the fireplace. Whenever it rained, the chair would move on its own, swaying gently as if an invisible figure were seated upon it. No one knew why, and no one dared to find out. Some claimed it was haunted, that a presence lingered within the walls, waiting. Others dismissed it as a trick of the wind, a creaky floorboard settling with age. But Thomas Holloway was not like the others. He was a writer always in search of the next great story, and when he heard about the house and its eerie legend, he knew he had to see it for himself. He had written about haunted houses before, about spirits and mysteries that lurked in the dark, but this was different. This was real. On a stormy autumn evening, Thomas arrived at the house. The sky was a deep, brooding gray, heavy with the promise of rain. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, the wind carrying a chill that sent shivers down his spine. He hesitated at the gate, staring up at the house. The windows were dark, the wooden panels weathered and cracked with time. It looked like a place frozen in history, untouched by modern hands. Taking a deep breath, Thomas pushed the gate open. It creaked loudly, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel path. With each step, the house loomed closer, its towering presence almost oppressive. The front door was unlocked, just as he had been told. He turned the handle and pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway coated in dust. The air inside was stale, carrying the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. His footsteps echoed as he ventured deeper, his eyes scanning the interior. Old furniture stood covered in white sheets, their shapes resembling ghostly figures. In the gloom, cobwebs clung to the corners, swaying slightly as the draft from the open door disturbed them. And then he saw it, the rocking chair. It sat in the living room, positioned near the stone fireplace. The wood was dark with age, the seat cushion faded and worn. For a moment it was perfectly still, as though waiting for something. Thunder rumbled outside. A few seconds later, the first drops of rain began to hit the roof, creating a soft, rhythmic patter. The chair creaked. Thomas felt a cold prickle run down his spine. He watched as the chair began to move, slowly at first, a gentle back and forth motion. The rain intensified, and with it, the chair's movement grew more pronounced, as if responding to the storm outside. He swallowed hard. He had expected something strange, but witnessing it firsthand was entirely different. His rational mind searched for explanations. Was it the wind? The vibration from the thunder? Some trick of the old wooden floors? And yet, deep down, he knew it was something else. Summoning his courage, Thomas stepped forward. The chair continued to rock, oblivious to his presence. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering just above the worn armrest. The air around it felt strangely cold, as though the warmth of the room refused to touch it. He hesitated, then pulled his hand back. A sudden gust of wind slammed the front door shut, the sound echoing through the house. Thomas spun around, his heart pounding. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and for the first time, he felt something else in the house with him, something unseen, watching. The chair rocked harder. The rain poured against the windows, lightning flashing into the distance. Thomas clenched his fists. He had come for a story, and now he was in the middle of one. But was it safe to stay? Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, he lowered himself into the chair. The moment he did, a wave of dizziness crashed over him. The room blurred, the sounds of the storm growing muffled. It was as if the world itself was pulling away from him. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the fireplace flickering violently, before it was swallowed by shadows, and then he was gone. Darkness, a cold, suffocating void surrounded Thomas as though he had been plunged into an endless abyss. His body felt weightless, disconnected from reality. His mind screamed for answers, but no sound escaped his lips. Had he blacked out? Was this a dream? Then, suddenly, light, a dim, eerie glow flickered around him, like the dying embers of a fire. Slowly, the world began to take shape. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and a strange, whispering wind passed through the space, though he saw no source. Thomas tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, as if unseen hands were holding him in place. He took a slow, shaky breath, gathering his thoughts. The last thing he remembered was sitting in the rocking chair. Then, nothing. His vision adjusted, and he found himself standing in what appeared to be the same living room. The fireplace was still there, its bricks old and cracked, but no fire burned within it. The walls, once dusty and faded, now seemed darker, worn by time. Everything looked eerily similar, yet undeniably wrong. The house was silent, unnaturally so. Something was missing. The rain. It had been pouring when he sat in the chair. Now, there was no sound of water hitting the windows, no howling wind outside. The world beyond the house felt distant, as if it no longer existed. Thomas swallowed hard and took a hesitant step forward. The floor creaked beneath him, but the sound was muffled, almost as if absorbed by the air itself. He glanced around, trying to steady his breathing. Every shadow in the room seemed deeper, stretched unnaturally across the floor and walls. Then he noticed it, the rocking chair. It was still there, but now it was perfectly still. It no longer swayed, no longer creaked. It sat motionless, as though whatever force had been controlling it had disappeared, or worse, was waiting. Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of unease crawl up his spine. He needed to get out of the house, to step outside and confirm that he was still in his world. He turned toward the front door, but as he reached for the handle, a deep chill ran through his fingers. The doorknob was ice cold. A terrible feeling settled in his gut. He tried twisting it, but the door refused to budge. He yanked harder. Nothing. It was as if the house itself had locked him in. His pulse quickened. A noise, a faint whisper, barely more than a breath, echoed from behind him. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Nothing. Then, another sound. Soft footsteps coming from upstairs. Thomas froze. He wasn't alone. His mind raced. Had someone else been trapped here before him? Was there another presence lingering in this strange version of the house? He hesitated, debating whether to call out, but something in his gut told him to stay quiet. Slowly, he moved toward the staircase. The wooden steps were warped and splintered, as if they had been abandoned for decades. Each step groaned under his weight, the sound swallowed by the eerie silence. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. Doors lined the corridor, some slightly ajar. The air here was colder, heavier. It carried the scent of damp wood and something else, something faint like old decay. A soft creak came from the end of the hallway. Thomas steeled himself and took a cautious step forward. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached the last door. It was slightly open, a sliver of darkness visible between the crack. He pushed it open. Inside was a bedroom, familiar, yet altered. The bed was covered in a thick layer of dust. The dresser tilted at an odd angle. A shattered mirror hung on the wall, its fractured surface reflecting warped images of the room. Then his eyes landed on something that made his breath hitch. A figure, sitting on the edge of the bed, its back facing him, was the silhouette of a woman. She was unnaturally still, her posture rigid, her head tilted slightly downward, as if lost in thought. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, partially obscuring the tattered dress she wore. Thomas's mouth went dry. Every instinct told him to run, but his feet refused to move. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, the woman turned her head, just enough for him to see. Her face was pale, unnaturally so, and her eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. A slow, almost imperceptible smile stretched across her lips, but there was no warmth in it. Thomas stumbled backward, his breath quick and shallow. The woman stood. The air grew colder. The shadows in the room lengthened, creeping toward him like living things. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't have sat in the chair." A sudden force slammed into Thomas, sending him tumbling backward. The world spun, darkness swallowing him once again. And then, silence. The silence was suffocating. Thomas lay motionless, his mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. One moment, he had been standing in the eerie bedroom, face to face with the ghostly woman. The next, an unseen force had struck him, and now he was somewhere else. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The room around him was different. The dust, the decay, the eerie emptiness, all gone. Instead, the walls were pristine, the wooden floor polished and warm under the golden glow of candlelight. The air smelled of lavender and old books, a stark contrast to the damp, rotting scent from before. Thomas pushed himself up, his body aching from the fall. He was still inside the house, but not the same version of it. This was the house as it had once been, alive and filled with warmth. The change sent a shiver down his spine. A soft murmur drifted from the hallway. Voices. Carefully, Thomas stepped out of the room, his heart pounding. Downstairs, light flickered from the parlor, shadows moving against the walls. He edged forward, drawn by curiosity but gripped by unease. When he reached the top of the staircase, he froze. A family sat in the living room. A man with sharp features and graying hair sat in a high-backed chair, reading a newspaper. Across from him, a woman in a simple but elegant dress was knitting. her fingers moving with quiet precision. And near the fireplace, a young girl sat on the floor, playing with a small wooden doll. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He recognized them. He had seen their faces in old photographs, the previous owners of the house, the Holloway family, his family. A chill ran through him. He had read about them in local records, how they had lived here decades ago. But he had never met them, never known them personally. He had assumed they were just another part of the town's forgotten history. Yet here they were, right in front of him. The little girl suddenly looked up. Thomas stiffened, his blood turning cold. Her eyes met his, not with fear, but with curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked. The room fell silent. The man slowly lowered his newspaper. The woman's knitting needles stilled. Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? That he was from the future? That he had sat in the cursed rocking chair and ended up here? Before he could respond, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the house, blowing out the candles. The fire in the fireplace flickered violently, casting eerie shadows across the walls. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the family was gone. The warmth vanished, replaced once more by the cold, empty stillness of the decayed house. The furniture, the light, the life. It had all disappeared. Thomas stood frozen, his breath visible in the icy air. Had he just witnessed a memory, a fragment of the past, playing out before his eyes? Or was something far more sinister at play? Whisper echoed from behind him. "You don't belong here." He spun around. The woman from before stood at the base of the stairs, her hollow eyes locked onto him. Thomas took an instinctive step back, his pulse hammering. "Who are you?" he demanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. The woman tilted her head slightly, her dark hair swaying. "You already know," she said softly. "You've always known." Thomas swallowed hard. The words made no sense, yet they sent a wave of unease crashing over him. The woman took a slow step forward. "This house remembers," she continued. "It holds the echoes of everyone who has ever lived here. Their joys, their sorrows, their mistakes." She paused, her empty eyes never leaving his. "And their punishments." A sudden pressure filled the room, like an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching unnaturally. The rocking chair, motionless until now, began to move again, creaking with an eerie rhythm. Thomas clenched his fists. He needed to get out. Now. Summoning his courage, he turned and bolted toward the front door. He reached for the handle, but just like before, it refused to budge. Panic clawed at him. He turned back, searching for another way out. The woman was still there, watching him. "You can't leave," she whispered. Thomas's breath came in ragged gasps. "Why?" The woman's smile was faint, almost sad. "Because the house isn't done with you yet." The rocking chair creaked louder. The walls groaned as if the house itself were alive. And then, darkness. Darkness swallowed Thomas once more. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was as if the very air around him had thickened, pressing against his skin like a heavy fog. He could still hear the creaking of the rocking chair, but now it sounded distant, almost like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. Then, suddenly, Light returned, not the warm glow of a fire, nor the dim flicker of candlelight, but a cold, unnatural illumination that seemed to seep from the very walls. Thomas found himself standing in the living room again. But something had changed. The house was shifting. The walls rippled like water disturbed by a stone. The furniture trembled, their edges blurring between past and present. One moment, everything appeared pristine, as it had been decades ago. Fire crackling in the hearth, the scent of fresh bread in the air. The next, decay returned, the fireplace crumbling, the floor warped with age. It was as if time itself was unraveling. Thomas took a cautious step forward, his breath unsteady. He had to get out, had to break free from whatever force was keeping him trapped in this nightmare. Then he heard it, a voice, soft, broken, filled with sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here." Thomas turned sharply. The woman stood in the corner of the room, her figure barely solid, as if she were flickering between existence and nothingness. Her hollow eyes stared into him, her expression unreadable. "Who are you?" he demanded again, though his voice wavered. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly raised a hand and pointed toward the rocking chair. Thomas followed her gaze, his pulse quickening. The chair continued to move, but now something was different. A shape was forming in it. A person. No, not a person. A shadow. It was seated there, rocking in slow, deliberate movements. Its form was indistinct, shifting like smoke, yet Thomas could feel its presence, heavy, ancient, watching him with unseen eyes. The air grew colder. "The house remembers," the woman whispered. "It remembers all who have sat in that chair, and it never lets them go." Thomas's mind raced. He had come here searching for a story, for inspiration, but he had found something far worse. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman took a step forward, the wooden floor groaning beneath her. "Because it was never just a chair," she said. "It was a doorway." Thomas's stomach clenched. A doorway to what? The woman's lips parted. But before she could answer, the shadow in the chair began to rise. The rocking stopped. A low, guttural sound filled the air, like a whisper that had been stretched into something unnatural. The figure stood fully now, towering, shifting, its shape refusing to stay still. And then it moved toward him. Thomas staggered back, his mind screaming for him to run, but his body refused to obey. The figure loomed closer, the very space around it warping. The walls trembled, the floor buckled. The house was coming alive, reacting to its presence. The woman grabbed his arm. "You have to break the cycle," she said urgently, "or you'll never leave." Thomas forced himself to speak. "How?" The figure was almost upon them now. The air was thick with its presence, heavy with something beyond fear. The woman's eyes darkened. "You have to destroy the chair." For a moment, Thomas hesitated. The chair was the center of it all, the reason he was here. But if she was right, if it was truly a doorway to whatever force was holding him prisoner, then destroying it might be his only chance. Summoning every ounce of courage, he lunged forward. The moment his hands touched the chair, a sharp, searing pain shot through him, as if the very fabric of reality was resisting his touch. But he didn't stop. With a desperate cry, he pushed the chair over, sending it crashing onto the floor. The moment it broke apart, A deafening sound filled the air, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The house shook violently, the walls cracked, splintering into darkness. The figure let out a final, echoing wail before it was pulled into the collapsing void. And then, silence. The house was still. Thomas gasped for breath, his body trembling. The woman was gone. The chair was nothing more than shattered wood. Had it worked? Before he could process what had happened, the world around him blurred. The house faded, dissolving into nothingness. And then he was back. Rain lashed against the windows. The fire in the hearth flickered. The house was as it had been before he sat in the chair. Thomas stumbled back, his mind struggling to grasp reality. Had it all been real? Or had he imagined everything? But then his eyes fell on the floor where the chair had been. It was gone, and in its place, only ashes remained. Thomas stood frozen, staring at the ashes where the rocking chair had been. The house was silent now, the storm outside still raging, but inside everything felt different. The oppressive weight that had clung to the air was gone, as if something had finally released its hold on this place. He took a shaky breath, his heart still hammering in his chest. Had it really worked? Was the nightmare over? Slowly, he turned in a circle, scanning the room. The shadows no longer seemed to stretch unnaturally. The walls were still cracked and aged, but they weren't shifting like living things anymore. The house felt abandoned again, just an empty relic of the past. But the ashes, Thomas knelt down, hesitant to touch them. Was it truly over? Or had he only stirred something deeper? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. A movement caught his eye. His head snapped up, but there was nothing there, just the dark hallway leading toward the stairs. And yet, he felt it. Someone watching. Thomas slowly rose to his feet. He had learned enough by now to trust his instincts. Carefully, he made his way toward the staircase, every step cautious. The wood groaned under his weight, but this time, the sound was just that. Old wood, nothing more. When he reached the upstairs hallway, he hesitated. The room where he had first seen the ghostly woman was ahead. The door was still slightly ajar, just as it had been before. He swallowed hard. Did he dare to look inside? A voice whispered in the back of his mind. You have to break the cycle. That's what she had told him. Summoning his courage, Thomas reached out and pushed the door open. The bedroom was empty. The bed still covered in dust. The shattered mirror still cracked on the wall. It was exactly as it had been before everything started, except for one thing. On the dresser, where nothing had been before, now sat a single object, a photograph. Thomas frowned and stepped closer. The edges were worn. The black and white image faded with the time. But as he picked it up, his breath caught in his throat. It was the woman. She stood near the fireplace, a soft smile on her lips, but she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a man who looked exactly like him. Thomas's pulse pounded in his ears. His hands trembled as he flipped the photo over. On the back, written in elegant cursive, were the words, Eleanor and Thomas Holloway, 1892. He staggered backward. His name, his family name. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't just some haunted house he had stumbled into. This house had been his. He wasn't just a visitor. He had been here before, lived here before, and died here before. The memories came flooding back in fragments. Images, emotions, flashes of another life. He had been here decades ago. He had sat in that chair, and he had been trapped just like all the others who had come after. Until now. Until he broke the chair. Until he ended the cycle. A deep calm settled over him. For the first time since entering the house, he felt at peace. The woman, Eleanor, had been trying to help him remember, trying to help him escape, and now she had. A soft warmth brushed past him, like a whisper of wind. Though the windows were closed, it wasn't cold this time. It was comforting. He turned toward the door one last time, knowing she was there. "Thank you," he whispered. The house seemed to sigh around him. And then, just like that, the air shifted. Lighter, free. Thomas walked down the stairs and stepped toward the front door. This time, when he turned the handle, it opened. The storm had passed. The rain had stopped. The sky, still dark, was clearing, revealing the faint glow of dawn on the horizon. Thomas stepped outside, inhaling the crisp, fresh air. He didn't look back. The past was finally behind him.